And welcome in, folks, to Open Mic Night. I am your host, Noah Taluki. And on today's episode, it's going to be a little different than it's been in the past. I have my good friend coming on, Ben Moroz, who is a relative of Don Shula, the late, great Don Shula, the winningest coach in NFL history. And I kind of want to do this every once in a while on the show. Of course, I'm a huge fan of NFL history and sports history. I've been very fortunate enough to have gotten to know Ben really well and gotten to know a lot about his family and Don's children and all that are still in the NFL. So we're going to learn a lot more about that later. And I feel like this is appropriate because the NFL season is going to be starting, and Ben's been wanting to come on for a long time. And I think this is just a great tribute to the beginning of the NFL season and really a great memory of Don Shula. So my good friend, Mr. Ben Moroz, relative of Don Shula and the Shula family. Ben, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. No, I'm excited to be here. And like you said, it's long overdue, man.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I know you've been wanting to come on for a long time. I'm really happy we were able to make this work. But I want to ask you first off for our listeners, as I mentioned before, you are a relative of Don Shula and his sons, Mike and Dave, and his other sons, Chris. What exactly is your relationship with them?
My relationship to Coach Shula is my grandmother, Jeanette, is his sister. So Don was her older brother.
I want to know, so what was it like growing up, in a football family? Because this is obviously not the normal. Not everybody grows up in such an esteemed NFL family, especially with the winningest coach in the history of the NFL, Don Shula.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We have so many memories growing up from going to games and people just who we know well and who we don't know well telling us how much he meant to them and how much he accomplished and how much they grew up admiring him. And it was always important to him and our grandma that, we always listened. And sometimes to us, it'd get a little much, but it was always fun. It was always competitive on Sundays. I always said it was the worst part of being a Shula was when they lost on Sundays afternoon. But it was great. It was so much fun. We got to experience so many things that kids just don't get to experience with going to games and being on the sidelines. And it was unbelievable.
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about each relative. And I know that you still keep in touch with Chris and Dave and Mike. We'll get into them later. But I wanted to start off with Chris. He's one of the younger guys in the Shula coaching tree, if you will. He's currently with the Los Angeles Rams, coaching with Sean McVay. I know you keep in touch with him a lot. Just talk about what you've seen with his experience down there in Los Angeles, especially, being on Hard Knocks now and keeping that John Carroll connection alive down there as well.
Yeah, it's really awesome. He was our defensive coordinator at John Carroll in 2000. I believe it was 2000. Was it 14, I think, Noah?
Yes.
And that was awesome. I was a senior in high school, and I remember, like everybody else, finding out the news that Coach Arth hired him, and I was very, very excited. And he actually encouraged me to come to John Carroll and work for him, and I was very, very excited to do that. But then he obviously got the job with the Chargers, and then he ended up going to the Rams with Sean McVay. And, yeah, he's been there now. I believe this is the fourth year, and they've accomplished so much in the years they've been there. They've been to the Super Bowl. They've been to the playoffs 2 out of 3 years, and then they had a winning record last year. The first 2 years, he was the quality control coach. And now he's coaching outside linebackers. So seeing that progression and that step up in his career, it was awesome. It was very cool to see. And he's doing it with his two best friends, Brandon Staley, who's also a John Carroll man, and Coach McVay, as you said.
Right, absolutely.
They were roommates in college.
One of the other relatives is Don Shula's son, Dave. Now, Dave, of course, was the head coach of the Bengals in the 1990s, then got fired from there. But then after that, went over to Shula Enterprises down in Miami and really helped expand that business a lot and really helped Don throughout his post-coaching career. So, Ben, just talk about what Shula Enterprises meant to the Shula family.
It meant a lot. It was something Don was talking to doing it. It wasn't something Don was really, I forget the governor's name. It was the early 90s. I'm not sure who he was, but he came to him and they put together a plan, and Don was a bit skeptical, but Don ended up agreeing to do it to help the Miami Lakes area. And then, as you said, Dave was with the Bengals. So they were both kind of working in the NFL and trying to work with the restaurant a little bit. And then it ended up, Dave left Cincinnati and he had enough of coaching. He wanted to be with his kids. Those were a tough 4.5 years that we went through in Cincinnati, and he was ready for a new challenge. And as a family, we've always been extremely proud of Shula Enterprises. I mean, what a I mean, we got to go to vacations down there and we got to eat at the restaurant, and I've gotten birthday dinners at the Shulas and Independence over here and playing golf. And I mean, it's awesome. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable to think he has accomplished all of that off the field. You know what I mean? And he's not even a business guy. Dave didn't major in business either. Dave majored in history at Dartmouth. So it's kind of amazing to see how the doors that football has, really opened up for them. I mean, it's something that I think is very cool. And that's what's inspired me to get my master's myself, because just seeing how they have left football and had different careers, and that Dave was out of it for 23 years and he just came back, and it's a whole new game. It's a whole new thing. And
so speaking of that, of course, Dave went to Dartmouth. After 23 years out of football with Shula Enterprises, he's now finally back in football, coaching the wide receivers at Dartmouth. Why the switch back to football?
It had been Coach Stevens is a good friend of Dave's. They were teammates at Dartmouth. They played there. Buddy was the quarterback and Dave was a receiver. And they have stayed close throughout the years. Dave would join him on his bike recruiting trips from San Diego to San Fran. And they'd bike all over recruiting Dartmouth football. And Dave decided that he had one more chapter in his life, and Leslie was okay with it. And they made the move up to New Hampshire, and they go back down to Florida every so often. But he loved it. He loved working with Coach Stevens, and the kids are great.
Finally, the last child, before we get to Don, I guess, is Mike. And, of course, Mike is now the quarterback coach for the Denver Broncos, coaching up Drew Lock down there in Denver. But he's had many NFL jobs, just with the offensive coordinator for the Giants, and then before that, the offensive coordinator with the Panthers when he went to the Super Bowl. And then he was the head coach of the University of Alabama for 4 seasons before Nick Saban. I want you to talk about what that experience was like for Mike down there in Alabama, and just a tough job down there to win in the SEC.
Yeah, Mike has had a great career. As you said, he's been all over the NFL, and he had the opportunity to be the head coach at his alma mater, Alabama. He was quarterback there. And yeah, he was hired after Coach Price was hired there, and Coach Price actually was hired in the offseason, and he was dismissed right before the spring game. And I know Michael was hired right after the spring game, so he was hired late. Spring games are in April, May? So he was hired in literally late into the offseason, and he came into a program that was not the Alabama that it was today. They were on probation. They were bowl banned. We had guys transferring out of the program because, as we saw with Penn State, guys wanted to be able to play in a bowl game. First year, they were 4-9. It was a tough year, and it was a process. And Michael, I mean, we've always believed that Mike he did a great job. And we've always been sad that it's been looked at not like that. To go from 4-9, 6-6 to 10-2. I mean, to be 10-0 in that season with Brody Croyle, and Prothro was healthy the first half of the season. And then the last year to finish 6-6 was real in that offseason to get a 7-year extension. I mean, it was hard. I mean, Michael, I know Michael really wanted to succeed there. I know he really wanted to win there. And I know he gave it everything he had. And in his exit interview, he actually said Roll Tide, which I've always thought was cool.
I know one interesting story that you told me in the past was with legendary recruit Tim Tebow. Now, of course, one of the greatest college football players of all time. It was between Florida with Urban Meyer and Alabama with Mike. Talk about that meeting that Tim Tebow had with some of those recruits and Mike Shula as well. That's a very interesting story. Yeah,
I was down there for the 05 LSU-Alabama game, and Alabama was number 3 in the country, and I believe LSU was number 5 or they were very highly ranked in their own right. And Tebow was there, on the sidelines for the game. And we heard a story with Mike that Mike told us he was recruiting, that super team at Florida. And he had a couple guys in his office who ended up playing in the NFL, like the Pouncey twins and Hayden and Hernandez, just the guys who were just freaks. And Mike was recruiting with Tim, and he was really talking with Tim about being his quarterback and where he's going to play. And he sits back and he looks around and he goes, well, where are you guys going? And they all look at Timmy and they say, we're going where he's going. And I think the magnitude of that moment and what that class did accomplish at the University of Florida hit him. And I know for a fact that, we thought we'd get him. And Tim thought, Mike was left-handed. Mike was an NFL quarterback, as Tim was left-handed, and Tim ended up playing in the NFL. And they had great chemistry when they were recruiting each other. And we thought it was going to happen. And Coach Meyer thought he was going to go to Alabama. And one of the recruiting guys in the office said, I don't think if he goes to Alabama, we're not going to be here very long. We have to get this kid. And they redirected their attention and they got him. Again, Urban and his staff were convinced that he was going to go to Alabama and he was not going to go to Florida. And Urban was ready to direct his attention to other recruits in that class. And it was really one of the assistant coaches who said, this kid needs to come to Florida. And then that whole class ended up going to Florida, and they won 2 national championships. Tim's, I believe it was his freshman year and then his senior year, right? And I mean, obviously one of the great all-time teams that we all got to watch. I could have went to Alabama.
I also wanted to ask you something about Mike, the offensive coordinator in Carolina when the Panthers made Super Bowl 50 and lost against the Denver Broncos, 15-1 that season. Even though he's no longer with the Panthers, he still has a great relationship with Cam Newton. Just talk about the connection that they had when they were there and the present day.
Yeah, they were very close. I remember when they drafted Cam, Michael was the quarterback coach there, and Cam was coming out of Auburn, and Mike went to Alabama. So we had some fun with the Alabama-Auburn rivalry, but they were very close. And Coach Chud was the offensive coordinator for the first 2 years. And then Michael got the promotion when Chud came here to Cleveland, and they had a great relationship. I met Cam at a training camp practice one day, and I introduced myself as Coach Shula's cousin. And he looked at me and he starts laughing. He goes, man, why is he so crazy? That guy he works me hard. And I remember just thinking it was funny. And we just thought it was great. And they were very close. And I remember when they would play in Miami, I think they played in Miami once or twice. The Shulas who were at the game, Cam took time after his interviews to go and talk to them, to see them. And he took a picture with Uncle Don and with Sherry and Mike's girls. And then I remember last year after we played Carolina, when Michael was in New York, I don't remember if it was this year or the first year, Cam went to the locker room of the Giants and waited for Mike, and they talked, and Graham Gano hit a bomb field goal at the end, and it was heartbreaking to lose that way. But no, we all thought it was unbelievable, the respect Cam had to wait for Mike and talk to Mike. And I know Cam was upset when they parted ways with Mike, and yeah, they're very close. Cam's always fought for him, and Mike fought for Cam.
Yeah, great story there. And last but not least, definitely the winningest coach in NFL history, Don Shula. Now, Ben, a lot of fans out there don't realize that Don was a Lions coach for 2 seasons in the mid-'60s before he was the head coach in Baltimore.
Yeah, that was his huge break in his career. He was in the college game. He went from Virginia DB to Lions defensive coordinator, and that was the early 60s, and he was the defensive coordinator for 2 years. And you're right, that's something that's always talked about. It's funny. I saw a picture in my attic a couple weeks ago, and it was a picture that it was a cake, and it had 325. It was a congratulations cake. It actually had a Lions helmet on it, which I thought was very interesting. I thought that was very cool. So he obviously must have thought a lot about the Lions to put that on that moment. You know what I mean? And I know he always considered that a break. And he always talked about playing on Thanksgiving, that his second year there, and playing the Packers, and when they were in their dynasty with Coach Lombardi. And he always has such great respect for Coach Lombardi. And they beat him, and they won the game. And I know that was one of his prouder moments throughout his career. It's funny because he had a lot of great moments.
So after Detroit, he moved on and became the head coach of the then Baltimore Colts, and really built the Colts into one of the best teams in the NFL. And they made it to Super Bowl III, one of the more famous Super Bowl games in the history of the NFL. And they lost. They got upset to Joe Namath and the Jets. Talk about that game with Don, because this was a huge turning point in his coaching career.
Yeah, Joe Namath, another Alabama guy who I've had the privilege to meet twice, both at Alabama games when I was a young kid. And yeah, that was definitely, in that moment, that was definitely a very dark moment in Don's career. First Super Bowl they lost. Carol Rosenblum said he left me with that legacy of losing to the upstart league. And he was heartbroken. He was very upset. And, it really did end up being the driving force of him leaving Baltimore. He and the owner, Rosenblum, were never really on the same page after that. And it's funny how that loss has been talked about. People have said that it was embarrassing, and then other side have said that it's what made Shula who he was. And I've always taken that side of the argument because it really forced him to change who he was. That was a loss that was, at the time, embarrassing. And he handled it with class. He had worked with Weeb Eubank in the past, who was the coach of the Jets, and he was proud of Coach Eubank, who's a Hall of Famer in his own right. And at that point, it was time to go. And he and Rosenblum, I believe the next year they were 8-6. And so it's not like they were great the next season. And then he was on to Miami. And in my opinion, that loss is what drove him to be relentless. That's why they practiced so hard and so many times a day in Miami. And I've said this, I don't think there'd be 5 Super Bowls in Miami in a perfect season without that loss in Baltimore.
Like you mentioned, those guys went really hard after it once he got to Miami. This was a new team, a newer team in the NFL at the time when he took the Miami job. There's stories of the Dolphins going swimming if it was too hot outside. They wouldn't even go to practice. They would go swimming. Then Don comes in. He does like 3 or 4 practices a day, no water on the field, stuff that's completely illegal in the NFL today. Just talk about that toughness that he instilled on that Dolphins team that helped them win those 2 Super Bowls in the early 70s.
Yeah, when he got there, the team had a lot of talent. There's no doubt about that. The team had a ton of talent. And a lot of Hall of Famers. Nick Bonacani was there on defense. Bob Greasy was there as the quarterback. Zonk, Kick, and Merck were there. He may have traded for Warfield, or Warfield may have been there. But it's funny, his first meeting, as Nick Bonacani has talked about it, he referred to them as a party team. Shula, when he got there, he said, "You guys don't know how to win. We are convinced that we are going to teach you guys how to win." And he and Coach Arsbarger and Joe Robbie helped him put it all together. And as you said, they practiced 3 to 4 times a day without water in the crazy Miami heat. As we know, that can be just absolutely insane. He himself, as the head coach, and the 6 coaches he had with him in the 70s, they changed that culture. And it was going to be hard work equals a success, and that's what it was for him.
So then we get to the perfect season, 1972. 17-0, no NFL team has ever done that since. What do you think of that record for Don? I know there's people out there that really appreciate that record. There's other people that say, well, they didn't play as many games back then as they do now. Just talk about them being the only undefeated team and how that still has impact on the NFL today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why we're still talking about it. Nobody else can do it. And it's funny how that season went down with Earl Morrow being the quarterback, Greasy going down. And it's very, every year we as a family and the whole sports world waits for that last team to lose. And when they do, all eyes turn to Miami, Florida, and the 72 team popping champagne and celebrating together. And nobody else can do it. I mean, it's funny how the last time we were close was Carolina when Michael was the coordinator. They were 14-0. I think that was the last closest we've been to the record. And it's unbelievable. It's a proud record. It's funny. We have a figurine of the 1972, like all the big players on the team in our living room, and seeing that every day is pretty cool.
So later on in Don's career, he has the opportunity to draft Dan Marino, and one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. There's an interesting story behind that because he fell in the draft to that 27th overall pick that the Dolphins had. There was a lot of speculation going on. What was going on? Why was Dan falling so much? Do you have any recollection of what actually happened there?
There's a lot of rumors about it. Who knows how much of it is true? I know the rumors were that Dan liked to have a good time. Dan liked to go out. Dan liked to party and have fun. And that scared the NFL away. People thought he was on drugs. Some thought that football wasn't his big thing. And his junior year, he absolutely lit it up. And then his senior year, he threw more picks and touchdowns. I think it was 17 touchdowns and 19 picks. And Pitt wasn't very good, as they were predicted to be, in the national championship, like they had played Herschel Walker and the Georgia Bulldogs the year before. And it was kind of the perfect storm for Dan to fall to us. And it's funny how the previous year, Miami had just been in the Super Bowl, losing to the Redskins. And the Redskins actually drafted Darryl Green after him, was a Hall of Famer in his own right. And that's probably one of the best breaks. And it's funny how we always talk about it, one of the best breaks that happened to the guy, because Dan was, as you said, in our opinion, the best to ever play the game.
I want to talk a little bit more about Dan, because just what a talented quarterback that was. And for Don, he was more known early in his career to establishing that run, with Mercury Morris and Larry Zonka and Jim Kick, the posse there. And then he goes to more of a wide open passing style. Talk about how he was able to adjust, because that seems to be one of his greatest attributes.
Yeah, that's been, as you said, that's been talked about throughout his whole career. He won with a run game in the 70s. Those guys left for the WFL, Zonk and Kick, and so he won games with Greasy, and then Greasy retired, and he ran the ball again, and they went to the Super Bowl. And then Marino came, and they threw it every play, and they went to the Super Bowl again. And just as you said, he was able to adapt. He was able to change to the guys he had. He didn't make them change to him. And it's funny, all those different recipes for success, that's what adds up to 347. You have to be able to change to coach 33 years in the league. There's so many different players and personalities and type of athletes that come through. And he was able to do that he was, even as an older man, he was able to do that in Miami with young kids who were playing, kids my age of 23 and obviously older. But it's funny, he was never stubborn. People joke that he was actually least stubborn in how he went about game planning and going about his way, because he was just open. They traded for Irving Fryer, and Irving Fryer had talked about it, that Shula set him free. He let him be creative in his route running. He let him do almost what he wanted to do, and Shula it worked. Dan was going to throw it downfield, and Irving was going to go run under it, and they had a lot of success, and they won a lot of games together.
So, of course, Don Shula, in honor of him, the Dolphins are wearing that 347 patch on their uniforms this season. Very, very classy move by the Dolphins. But I just want to know, Ben, you see some of these coaches that are coming closer to that 347, like Bill Belichick, who's getting there.
Do you want Don to own that record forever, or do you? I mean, records are meant to be broken. So, I mean, do you want Belichick to eventually pass him, maybe, or do you want that Don to have it?
Coach Belichick's at 304 right now. Coach Shula is at 347, so 43 games. I've always been very proud of that record. I think that, in my opinion, that is his most famous record. I believe when he retired, he had the most record Super Bowl appearances as a head coach as well. That sound's been broken by Coach Belichick as well. Coach Belichick's a great coach, and Don's daughter, Sharon, she said it best last year around Father's Day, that, yeah, like you said, Coach Belichick is getting close to Don's record, and she took a very classy route saying it's our turn to appreciate how the Hallis family felt when Don was coming up on Coach Hallis's record of 324. And personally, I would love to never see it be broken. I just think, 347 and how he did it. It was, as we said, he did it with a run game in the 70s, and then he did it with a passing game, and then he in a run game in the early 80s, and then with, so the way he won was so impressive. And to be in a Super Bowl in the 60s, in the 70s, and then in the 80s. And I always said, the guy was winning games when Kennedy was in office, and he was winning games when Clinton was in office. I mean, who does that? He guy coached Johnny Unitas and he coached Dan Marino. Who does that? So the excellence of 347, I personally would love to see that. And I know he was very proud of that record. And I know he would be proud to have passed away with the record. He was able to do that. So I know that meant a lot to him, or that would have meant a lot to him that he passed away with it.
Do you have obviously you've been down to Miami plenty of times, and you've seen Don a lot before he passed away. Do you have a favorite memory of him with you or your family?
When we graduated from high school, we were down in Miami, and we stayed at the Shula Resort in Miami Lakes. And it was weird. We had no plans of seeing them. Uncle Don and Aunt Marianne, we had no plans of seeing them. And my dad literally just called him randomly and told him we were in Miami. And he said, come on over. And we went over and we spent the whole day at his house. And his house was just, it was awesome. Raymond Floyd, I lived in the neighborhood. Enrique Iglesias, his parents lived in the neighborhood. So, it was very cool to be in there. And you've seen his office with the Lombardi trophies and the Hall of Fame bus. And my brother sat at the office and in the coach's desk and took a picture of it. And wow. And they ordered us food from the clubhouse. And it was just, he answered all of our fan questions. He was very cool. It was great. It was just a great day. We spent the whole day with him, and he would call really up until he died. He would call our dad and say, "When are you and the boys coming back down?" And that was years ago, Uncle Don. And then my other favorite Uncle Don quote is, he would always say, "The kids who can't get into Carroll go to Harvard." One John Carroll graduate.
Of course, for the listeners out there, we talked to head John Carroll coach Rick Finati a couple weeks ago, and talked about some of the alumni of John Carroll. Don Shula, definitely the most famous. And he really, really appreciated John Carroll a lot. And talk about it, because the stadium is named after him, Don Shula Stadium at John Carroll. And talk about how much John Carroll meant to him to help him springboard into his later life.
Oh, it meant a lot to him. As I said, he graduated there from 51. When he graduated high school, I don't believe he went straight to college. He stayed home for a little bit, and he ran into a coach at John Carroll who he knew, and he offered him a scholarship, and it was the opportunity for him to go to school. And as we talked about the Super Bowl III being a changing point in his life, one of the huge changing points in his life was when they played Syracuse at John Carroll, and Weeb Eubank was a scout for the Browns and a coach, and Paul Brown was the head coach of the Browns. And they were all at the game watching Syracuse players, and he and Carl Tassif, a fellow John Carroll man, were drafted by the Browns, and they were actually the only two rookies to make that team. And Shula made it originally, then Tassif joined him later. And that opened it up. And as we know, Coach Polian was a pillar of the NFL and a Hall of Famer in his own right. And, two of his three boys went to John Carroll. And when they went to John Carroll, Coach Polian served on the rules committee with Coach Shula for years. They were on the NFL rules committee, so they were very close. And obviously, Polian was a Buffalo in those years when Buffalo beat us all those times, went to the Super Bowl 4 years in a row. And it's funny because, Tom Telesco was at John Carroll those days, and Greg Roman was at John Carroll they were all teammates. London Fletcher was a linebacker. And it's just that NFL connection with Coach Shula and Coach Polian. And they just started working with Coach Polian, being ball boys, being scouting assistants, starting at the bottom. And it's funny how Shula and, Polian, who really didn't go to John Carroll, but really helped. I know he loves John Carroll. Obviously, we see his son, who's at Notre Dame, tweet about John Carroll all the time. And it's funny how that really opened up the gap. That really opened up that Division III school and University Heights being a pipeline to the NFL.
Ben, you mentioned actually he was on the rules committee with Bill Polian. One of the big things in the NFL that a lot of people don't realize was those 1978 rule changes that really opened up offenses. Back then you had safeties hitting receivers before the ball was thrown, and there wasn't a whole lot of scoring back then. A lot of it had to do with just how ferocious these defenses were. But then Don was kind of one of the pioneers of those 1978 rule changes that really opened up offenses all over the league and are a huge reason why we see offenses taking off in the NFL today.
Yeah, I know Don was always very proud to be on the rules committee. He was always a very man of integrity. He was very honest. But yeah, as you said, the rule changes in 78 were huge for the game. And I watched a interview with him that he said that they were trying to open up the game, make it more exciting for the fans. We played in the Super Bowl against the Vikings, and I think Greasy threw the ball 8 times. And you see now with Patty Mahomes and Tom Brady lighting it up. It's funny how that can be attributed to them and Dan Marino, and that really all changing the game, the rules, and then Marino, Elway, and Kelly being drafted in 83. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely, as you said, it was one of his great – he was always very proud of that. He always talked about that. He even talked about it when we were down there with him in Miami, how proud he was to be on the rules committee for 20-plus years. Speaking
of integrity – I know there's that famous story when they were playing the Raiders back in the day. They were going through a walkthrough, and somebody presented Coach Shula with a Raiders playbook that they had left in during their walkthrough, and then they ended up losing on Sunday. What was going on with that?
Yeah, I saw that. I've heard that be discussed. They were playing the Raiders, as you said, in California, and it was Larry Zonka and Monty Clark who found it. And Zonka gave it to Coach Clark, and Coach Clark walked into Shula's office, and he said, we got the blueprint, we got their game plan, how they're going to try and beat us. And as the Football Life documentary says, Coach Shula said, throw it away. And they lost the next day. And back then they had a great rivalry with Coach Madden and the Raiders. And as we know, the Sea of Hands game in 74. And they lost. And it's funny, Zonka couldn't figure out why they lost. And later in the week, it came up that he approached Monty Clark. He said, what happened? We had their stuff. And he just said to him again, Shula said, throw it away. When you have their stuff and you know what to do, that's cheating. And he would never cheat. And he had the opportunity to there. And he always hated when he heard stories about people cheating. He always won the right way. And I know that meant a lot to him. And he always said that was one of his proudest accomplishments.
I wanted to ask you a little more fun side of Don, one of the more popular movies in the 1990s, Ace Ventura. A very funny movie with Jim Carrey set in Miami. Don actually made an appearance in Ace Ventura. There's a funny story, though, behind that when they were shooting his part in the film.
Yeah, he told us about that story when we were down there, when I talked about my senior year of high school in 15. They wanted him to do it. Jim Carrey wanted him to do it. And as we know, Dan Marino was making the transition into acting as he was in that movie. He was in Little Nicky, and then he was on NFL Today for 10 plus years. So Dan was really getting in front of the camera. And Don was a guy, he didn't want to do it. As you know, as from our conversations at John Carroll, he was a very routine man. He'd wake up early. He'd go to mass in the morning. He went to mass every day of the week. And that wasn't going to mess his routine up. He said, if I'm going to do it, we're going to do it right before mass. Had the movie cast and the director and Ace Ventura and everybody come out to his neighborhood, and they blocked off the road, and they shot it right as the sun rose in the morning, and he went to mass. And I think Marianne had a part of him doing it too. But yeah, no, our parents never told us he was in that movie until we saw it. It was funny.
Last question for you, Ben. Don just passing away in May, a very, very sad occasion down in Miami at his home. What is his legacy? The 347, everything that he did on the field, but even considering all the things that he did off the field, and how he impacted all of his players and the relationships that he had and everything that he did, even at Shula Enterprises. What do you think his legacy is?
Yes, it's a lot. I'm sure that, he has said that's a career he didn't have a lot of regrets. As you say, he was very well versed. He had majored in philosophy at Carroll, and then he went to Case Western and got his master's in physical education. And he's actually the John Carroll philosophy chair, the Don Shula chair at Carroll, and as his name's on the football stadium as well. So you see the broadness in that from being a lover of philosophy and then a football coach. Coaching for 33 years in the NFL and winning 347 games, going to 6 Super Bowls. That's very impressive. And in the same sense, he raised 5 children. He married his childhood sweetheart, Dorothy, and I know he was close with his 5 children. I know as Dorothy was sick, he was there for her, and he started the Don Shula Foundation for breast cancer, and they raised a lot of money. Yeah, he was there with her as he was going to 320, to 300, to 325, and there's a very famous video of him talking to Coach Parcells and just opening up before a ball game about how Dorothy was struggling. And then even after Aunt Dorothy died, he was able to find love again with Marianne, and he was able to have her by his side when he broke the record. It's very cool to see him be as successful as he was as a husband, as a father, as a football coach, as a scholar. And that's very impressive. And what he accomplished in business, I think I told you in college, there's 34 shulas across the country, something like that. That's very impressive. And then there's a hotel, and that's very impressive. And his name is very cool.
That's very, very awesome, Ben. And we want to thank Ben Moroz for coming on, one of the cousins of Don Shula, the winningest coach in NFL history, 347 wins. Ben, thank you so much. I'm very, very happy we were able to do this.
Thank you. No, I had a great time, man.
And I want to thank my good friend Ben Moroz for coming on again. He's been a really, really good friend to me the last few years that I've known him. You know, what's interesting is I actually met Ben on my first day of class my freshman year. And I walk into class and I see this kid with a Carolina Panthers sweatshirt on, and I'm thinking, well, I'm in the middle of Cleveland. Why would I see somebody with a Panthers sweatshirt on? So I went up to him after. I said, oh, are you a Panthers fan? And he said, yeah, my uncle is actually the offensive coordinator for the Panthers. And I said, no way, your uncle is Mike Shula. And he looked at me and he says, yes, wow, I'm really surprised you know who he is. And I said, well, of course, who could not know about the Shula family? And I told him all about how I've watched all these documentaries about him. I've read some books on Don, and him and I just became really, really close ever since. So I always treasure that moment, and I'm really happy that Ben has been able to open up about his family to me and really teach me all about the Shula legacy, and that's been a true honor and privilege to be a part of. And I always had a lot of respect for the Shula family, and he is such a big part of NFL history, and I'm very happy that I was able to honor him like that on this podcast just before the start of the NFL season. But stay tuned for next week. We'll talk a lot about Tigers, and I know they're 500 right now, and they're pushing for that playoff spot. Also, the Lions, some interesting remarks from training camp, and we'll be getting more into that next week, since it'll be 1 week away before the start of the NFL season. But until then, thanks for tuning in, folks, to Open Mic Night.